Hi, welcome. Thank you for joining us. And so happy that you're here. um, could you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, my name is Bianca Mayes. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am a Jersey girl, born and raised, never left.
And could you tell me how does the LGBT community relate to you?
Sure. So, so much history. I couldn't help but think of just my own growing up and finding community in New Jersey. I um I identified myself as queer. I want to say 17. I went off to college at William Patterson. um, and I really found like my queer roots on campus, which was a really nice experience. Obviously, I graduated from undergrad, and I think I was trying to find LGBTQ community here in New Jersey instead of going to the city, but specifically looking for Black queer places to go. Um, just because I noticed that New Jersey has a lot of agencies, bars and clubs, etc., that are very focused on like gay men, but not necessarily a lot for queer women. And a lot of the spaces that exist aren't diverse. So when you go to them as a Black queer woman, or if you go to them as a person of color, very often you're sticking out, looking around like, where are my people at? Because they're just not here. And so I think I found refuge in actually leaving New Jersey and finding queer people that look and sound like me, either in DC, Maryland, or New York, or Philadelphia. Philadelphia has a really good spot, but not so much Jersey, unfortunately.
Yeah, yeah. And it's like there's reasons for that though,
Hmm.
and it's like economic reasons. And I think people they don't think about that and they don't think why that it's always, the image. And this is what I always kind of bring up is that the image of LGBT or gay is not exclusively a feminine gay male from the 80s. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? There's so much more, and we have to be compassionate to, and understand that there's so much more
Yeah,
and make space for all that.
absolutely. I think part of the issue is that unfortunately a lot of places that are queer owned and not diverse because Black organizers, Latinx organizers, Asian organizers, Indigenous organizers have been shut out. And that includes New Jersey as well. I mean, if you look at our state, we have a lot of diversity, but we also have a lot of segregation.
Hmm.
And that segregation also shows up in LGBTQ spaces, in LGBTQ uh, uh, events and LGBTQ programs. And I think that there's a lot of work that needs to explicitly be done for communities of color. It's not enough to just say this is an LGBTQ event and think that you're going to get diversity, because there are plenty of clubs and bars, et cetera, in New Jersey that say LGBTQ all the time. But when you go there, almost majority of their patrons or clients or et cetera are white, patients included. You have to explicitly be inclusive and promote and target and learn about communities of color, and not just treat us like an and all. It's not enough to be LGBTQ friendly. You have to do a lot
Yeah.
more work than that.
And it is work. It really, really is work because I'm in that spot a lot of times trying to target our communities of Black and Brown communities, right? And when I say that, it's always like, well, what about the others? We have to be inclusive. And generally my expression for is like, well, everything's for them. You know what I mean? Everything's for them. So appreciate that. So I'm trying to, of course, we're never gonna turn people away, you
Mhm.
know, but I want to make sure there's room and space for people of color because we don't have that,
Yeah.
right? And that's such a difficult thing to get right in a place where people have, internalized,
Mhm,
homophobia, internalized racism,
mhm.
internalized, all that isms inside of themselves, as well as, you know, sorry, just
No,
soapbox.
no, it's okay. It makes me think about something that I learned about if you make space and resources and time for the most marginalized of community groups, it applies to everyone. It's like the cut curb effect, which is in the past, disability rights movement makers advocated for the curb to be cut so that people would be able to go down it into the street so that you wouldn't just step off of the curb and fall. And originally, it was created to serve the needs of people that were disabled or are disabled, meaning the more marginalized group. But
Yeah,
after they started putting cut curbs into the sidewalks, they actually found that people that were able bodied were falling less. People that were running or jogging or biking weren't falling off of the curb. People that were pushing strollers were able to push the strollers and not worry about it damaging themselves or their child. So something that was created for a marginalized community ended up working for everybody. And that's a perfect example of how we need to centralize focusing on communities of color and other marginalized groups. And then it can apply to everyone. So if you advocate for trans people and do what you can to make sure that you have support and resources for them, in theory, it will also support people that are not trans.
yeah.
So I always push back against, like, we don't want to be too inclusive of one thing and not another. It's like if you are inclusive of people that are more marginalized, then everyone else will benefit from that. There is no downside to that at all.
Thank you. That's you don't know how immensely helpful breaking that down for me. You just have no idea how. Thank you so much for that. All right, so let me ask you, the main question is, what do you think there is no LGBT center in Bergen County? Do you think it's needed, and what would those needs be?
I definitely think it's needed. I mean, Bergen County is so close to New York City, so close. And I can't help but think of, when I was younger, completely going to a different state because that's where I found my community. I think it's a real disservice. And Bergen County has a lot of different patrons in it. I think one of the reasons why Bergen County doesn't have an LGBTQ center is because, unfortunately, the LGBTQ people or community learn to migrate away from areas that are not seen as progressive. So, and it's the same thing for communities of color. So, that very often communities of color, LGBTQ people, we gravitate towards places where there's a sense of community. And unfortunately, Bergen County doesn't necessarily have a facility like that. I'm not saying there isn't an LGBTQ community there. I'm not saying people of color aren't there. We are. It's just there's no place for us to socialize together. And then when LGBTQ centers are created, very often it's created in association with something else. And I see this working like in the HIV space where it's like, we'll build a queer center, but it's through this hospital or this community center. And it becomes less about the community and more about the agenda of that agency. So I think if there's going to be a center, it needs to stand on its own. It needs to be completely supported by the township. It needs to be supported and advocated throughout the county as a resource. And it needs to offer things for the community that are not necessarily centralized in how do I say this? Not necessarily centralized in services. And I say this because very often queer centers or places exist, but it's not often enough where we can just gather as a people and just that be it. I mean, I would love to be around other Black queer people and we're just there chilling, hanging out, enjoying each other, maybe sharing food, not necessarily being bombarded with some agency pushing something down my throat, like, oh, you have to learn about this because we're here. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like, just have a space where we can just be ourselves and queer and people of color, and that's it. And I think a lot of agencies don't see value in that, but there is extreme value in that. And you can see that in New York City. You can see it in other states with larger cities. I don't know why New Jersey is not there yet, even though we're seen as progressive. We have some work to do. I had someone tell me once that New Jersey is like a blue pill with a red center, where you think we are further along than we should be,
Uh-huh.
but we're not.
Yes. And it's like my husband has this theory, probably soon be talking about this here, but he's saying with Puckett um, that New Jersey is very democratically run, but
Mhm,
has roots in Republican, very,
mhm,
very deep roots in Republican Party. So they're very conscious that it can be taken away. So
mhm,
let's make sure it's palatable and all this kind of stuff. But when they have that kind of approach, the sacrificial lamb is the people like us.
mhm.
And the more checks that you have on a box, the less the more you're going to be sacrificed.
Absolutely.
And that's sort of like where we're thinking is like, I'm sorry, but that's not acceptable.
Yeah.
I've had some really close friends just not be here now because of that
Yeah.
mentality. You know.
It's gonna take New Jersey shifting dynamics. And I think that that's something that is happening all across the board. So in healthcare and education, et cetera, et cetera. Like even in education, we're the sixth most segregated state, racially segregated state in
Yeah.
education. And this is
Okay.
current. So we are, progressive, but not enough. We can
Yeah.
certainly do the work. And it I think it has to do with diversifying boards. It has to do with diversifying funds. It's not enough to just have, a singular LGBTQ person or a couple of people. You need to have half of your board be community of color. You need to have a quarter of your board be queer. You need to redistribute your funds if you are a larger agency to one of the smaller community agencies. I'm not talking about large agencies that cover different counties. No, put the money in local places. So if you build an LGBTQ health or excuse me, LGBTQ center in Bergen County, have Bergen hospitals give money to that center. Have the Bergen County Department give that money to that center. That's what should be done instead of giving it to other places. Centralize the work and localize your resources and organize. That's super important.
Mm, awesome. So, what do you think would be? We're talking about like the funding and the stuff. What do you think would be needed in terms of like we have the center? What is needed? I mean, I love the idea of having spaces like that, and I really try to incorporate that to have a space just for people to exist because we don't. How else are we going to build a community? We don't allow a community to gather and to just be themselves. But what kind of practical services? Because I take that on board. Outside of that, though.
It's a hard question. I mean, and I've seen this done successfully in some instances. You know, we would need a community center, a place for people to gather, a neutral place, right? A place that's untouched by other organizational agenda, a place where people can meet others, and perhaps the center could have spaces for youth, spaces for LGBTQ older adults, right? Because there's still a lot of work that needs to be done specifically in that area.
Yes.
There could be LGBTQ substance free spaces because a lot of our queer spaces are in bars,
Mm,
right? And what if you don't want to drink? What if you're in recovery? What if you just need a place where you can have a distraction? Um, we need a space where we can learn. It would be great to have a queer center where you can learn about queer history. It's all right there. Books, knowledge, courses, classes on different things of interest that aren't necessarily associated with services. So maybe makeup courses for trans women that want makeup, or for feminine people that want to work on their makeup skills. There could be a center that talks about employment. Here's how you make a resume. Here's how you go on a job interview and look great. Those kind of skill building activities, there's no reason why that can't exist specifically for queer people when they do for other demographic communities. I
Yeah.
mean, if we're thinking of like the Jewish Community Center, perfect example of something existing for a different group of people. When we're thinking of you know just different community organizations that exist based on race or gender or religion, there's opportunity for that to exist for the LGBTQ community because we are a marginalized community, and there are more people identifying themselves as queer. So I think that we're only going to see an increase in LGBTQ New Jerseyans and an increase in need. And I know that sometimes queer people will find their community elsewhere. And it just feels like, as a Jersey resident, I feel like we're kind of failing as a state if our queer community is just going somewhere else. It would take a queer community organization that is led by people of color, queer people of color, because again, we don't want to fall into that space of having an affluent white cisgender person run another LGBTQ space. We've seen enough of that. It's literally all over in different states. We've
Hmm.
right, so let's be different. Let's have someone else lead, take the reins, and see what other programs and initiatives could be born from that. And then, being careful about what kind of services you do want to offer, because it would be nice, but you don't want it to be overhanded where people will feel that, oh, the state has control of this community center. It should be the people running the community center, having it be led by the community itself, giving them the funds that you would give to larger LGBTQ organizations that are nationwide. You
Hmm.
can do that here. Build up your own communities.
That's beautiful. That's a wish list, right? It's a wish list.
It's a,
And but it's hard because how do you, that's the goal, right? But how do you do that without a community? We have people here, but we
Mhm.
don't have community. And to build up the community, and then like I've been talking to lots of people about how to go about this, and it seems you can't have one or the other.
Mhm.
It's either one or the other. You can only support youth, or you can only support senior, but you can't have just a community center and have both in the same spot. Like, why why is that? And I find that insulting when people say that. It's like, because like you said, if you had a Jewish center, you can have a youth group in a Jewish center, and you can have a senior thing, and you can have non. But why is it when it's LGBT you can't have both things in the same spot? And it's almost, when people say, they're like, of course you can. I'm like, why? I'm allowed in the room with my daughter. She's 10. It's like, we're not going to blow up or anything. What?
I think the main thing is challenging straight cisgender people from hypersexualizing our communities. Because very often when you say LGBTQ, people's minds jump to sex immediately. And I tell people that your gender identity, your gender expression, your sexual orientation are just different components of your life, but not your entire life, right? It's not your entire identity. If I were to tell you to pick one of your many identities and just live that identity and abandon the rest, majority of us couldn't do it. And to limit resources based off of someone's sexual orientation or gender identity because you're hypersexualizing their life, is very, very wrong to me.
Yeah.
I,
I,
I yeah.
I give you a story. I was in one of my past lives and my past jobs. I was talking to I believe this organization about creating for kids that are being trafficked, sexually trafficked, and stuff like that. Right? How do we help LGBT kids understand that, gay kids understand like the dangers of that? And they had these examples of where it's clearly it's red situations. And one of them was an older gay man befriending a younger gay man, taking him out to show the community. And they saw that as an older person grooming a younger person to, and I had real issues with that. And I tried to express to them, you don't understand the culture. This is how we form families. This is how we survive. And
Mhm.
you can what you really need to do is, how do you tell the difference between someone that's helping you and someone that's actually trying to prey on you? Because they're being gay and older doesn't mean you're a pervert, and that's the message I'm getting when you say this.
Yeah.
And they could not grasp that concept. They were just, no, this is clear, he's clearly a pervert. I was like, well, you're forgetting. And then Pose comes out, and then everyone understands families, gay families,
Yeah.
so
I think I think the hardest thing is dismantling the idea of family that gets promoted, right? Because very often it's very, mom, dad, 2.5 kids, or biological family, and not understanding the dynamics that majority of families in America are not nuclear. And so we have to take that idea apart of, oh, you can't be taken care of by someone that's not related to you, or you can't be taken care of by people that are significantly older than you,
mm,
right? We have to challenge that because we've seen it in all instances across all countries, the rise of other families that are not nuclear.
it's it's not the rise. The nuclear family never really existed. That's not the norm. I don't understand. That was never the norm. That
Yeah.
was modeled out of like the Ozzy and Harriet. You probably don't know this reference. It was an old TV show. It was modeled after that. And they took, when that ideology came about, they had census, and it didn't reflect the
Mm,
community of that time. And never since, it's never really reflect that. There was always a divorce rate, high divorce rate. There's always been single mothers and single fathers and grandparents. That is the norm.
yeah.
It's not normal. This nuclear family is like, it's not as normal as people make it out to be.
Yeah. And you can blame that, on media. You can blame that on like white supremacy culture trying to push this idea that it has to be this way and that no other things exist. You're making me think of like indigenous communities where the community literally will take care of babies when they're born. Like
Yeah.
it's not the sole mother's job or the sole parent's job of a child that's born. You could literally go to like your community and be like, here, please take care of the child so I can do another task.
Yes.
And that's seen in many indigenous cultures, not only, you know, um, indigenous cultures here in America, but also globally as well, where there's a sense of community to, live together, to eat together, to pool your funds together as a family or a unit to be able to get things that you need and share those resources. So definitely.
Yeah. I love you. I do. I just love talking to you. So I'm just being sensitive to the time. I know we almost through. I just wanted to ask you, are you comfortable with everything that was said here? Do you feel comfortable with it? You know that this is being recorded and to be used at a later date, made public. Do you give consent?
Absolutely.
And I just want to say, because one of the things we're talking about is, I don't think queer people get recognition and the accolades they deserve, and hold them up as like, you're a hero, you're a star. And I
Mhm.
just want to say, you are a hero, you are a star, because you outshined in every place you walk into, and when you talk, it's like boom. You do that and you have that presence, and I'm just so in awe of you, and I just love when you're around. You
Thank
just
you so
you're
much.
just such a great person. So I just want to say thank you for doing this. And if you want to say goodbye to everyone so I can end the recording. Unless
Sure.
you have anything else you want to add to this. I'm sorry. If you have anything else you want to add.
I'll say a few before I go.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
This has been an honor. So thank you so much for just providing me this opportunity to, speak about some of the local issues that we have here in New Jersey. I believe in New Jersey. I mean, we're a great state, but we can definitely be better. I
Mm,
want to challenge us all to do the work. I want to challenge us all to call out white supremacy and structural racism in places
yes.
where you don't see other. I always tell people, if you are at a queer event and you don't see other communities of color, then it's not an LGBTQ event. It's a white LGBTQ event. And you need to learn the difference. If you don't see trans women of color, if you don't see other, communities there and it's all white LGBTQ people, that's not an LGBTQ event. And so I want to challenge us as a state to not associate LGBTQ and not have racist undertones underneath that. So let's do the work. Let's dismantle white supremacy and structural racism together and give Black and Brown people the flowers that we deserve while we are alive to gather them.
Thank you. And thank you for saying that. Thank you so much. So I'm going to end the recording. Just hold on.